standing for the reading of the Gospel. Our Gospel lesson comes from Mark chapter 16. The story of the resurrection, as Mark tells it. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They'd been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You're looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Yet, Mark's version of the good news of Jesus Christ ends like that. 3 women learned that Christ is risen, and they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Is that any way to end the story? But the best evidence we have says that's what Mark did. The oldest and best manuscripts end right there. Now it seems that early Christians had trouble with that ending. Mark and Luke both took Mark as the starting point for their Gospels. And then they added a bunch of parables and other sayings. They fixed Mark's grammar. They rearranged some things. They both extended the end. Mark adds an angel to roll away the stone, and the women running to tell the disciples, and Jesus meeting them on the way and asking them to tell the disciples to meet him in Galilee. And guards and priests agreeing on a lie to explain the missing corpse, and then finishing with the disciples actually meeting Jesus in Galilee and receiving the Great Commission. Luke takes a slightly different approach, but he adds a second angel. He puts in the women going to the disciples who dismissed their idle tale, except for Peter, who went to check it out. Some discouraged disciples meet Jesus on the road to Emmaus, and then they go running back to Jerusalem to tell the other disciples, who believed them because they were men. And then Jesus appearing and leading them all in a Bible study, and then leading them to the Mount of Olives just outside Jerusalem, where he commissioned them as his witnesses and then disappeared into heaven. 2 other writers wrote new endings for Mark when they copied it. And one said briefly that the women went to the disciples after all, and the men took it from there. And the second shoved together summaries of the Mary Magdalene story from John's Gospel and the Emmaus story from Luke's Gospel, and shoved together the various commissioning speeches and added to that some extra bits about snake handling and drinking poison and speaking in tongues, and then the the Ascension. Those are printed as additional endings in most Bibles. Folks just didn't like the way that Mark ended his story and were eager to fix it somehow. But what if Mark knew what he was doing? After all, Mark is a very good storyteller. So good that one man sold out an extended Broadway run a while back, where he stood on a mostly empty stage and recited Mark in the King James Version, start to finish. Mark uses all sorts of storytelling techniques to maintain interest and forward motion all the way from start to finish. Why should he suddenly forget what he's doing at the very end? Or could it be that we're the ones who forgot? We're so used to reading the Bible a few verses at a time that we hardly ever think of reading a whole book at a time. We read Mark as a collection of little stories. The fancy Bible scholar word for that is a pericope, which is from Greek meaning chop around. Try to imagine Mark as one story. The good news about Jesus. Try to imagine hearing Mark as a whole, beginning with John the Baptist and Jesus, and then the calling of the first disciples to learn to fish for people, and the first miracles, and teaching about God's kingdom. The disciples asking, what kind of glory are we going to get for being good disciples? And Jesus answering with a talk about service to the poor, and quite possibly warning them about punishment. It's a pattern that last bit is a pattern that's so important that Mark repeats it 3 times with slight variations, and puts those 3 times right in the middle of the gospel. And then Jesus travels to Jerusalem with the disciples. There are questions and attacks in the temple. A woman anointed him as if for burial, and the disciples ate a final meal with him before he was arrested, tried, executed, and buried. And then that little bit that we had for today's gospel lesson. The women find an empty tomb. They get instructions from an angel. And they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. But what happens to the story? Who's going to tell the story? The women ran away from the tomb, scared. The disciples ran away from the garden, from the high priest's house, from the cross, scared. Someone has to do something. But who? Who can tell the whole story? Well, what about you? You've heard it. You can tell it. If you need help, you've got it all in writing. Christ has taught us how to live as God's people. Christ has died. Christ is risen. Christ will come again. And in the meantime, you've got a story to tell. And in the telling,